and welcome to Lard TV for the first video in a series of videos we're going to be doing to allow us to do a run through Infamy. So you'll see not only how a game is played but also how we set everything up. You'll notice probably that the table is completely bare. That's because Infamy has a terrain generation system which we have developed, which will cover all the different areas that the games can be set in, so Britannia, Germania, Gaul, and also some rules for especially hilly regions and so on and so forth. So what we're going to do is really start at the very beginning and have a look at how we set up our table, then how we go through and determine what our mission is, and then how we select our forces from the core list and also the support list. So that should give you a chance to see exactly how the whole thing fits together, and then we can go through and play a game. And what I'll try and do during that game is take the opportunity to show you exactly how different aspects of the rules work, to give you an even better idea about what you're in for. So let's start off. We can look at the table here, and when you come to the rulebook you'll see that the table is actually divided into 6 parts. So they're all 2 foot square, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 as we go across here. And the first thing we're going to do is roll a dice to see if we've got any hills on the table. Now I'm in Germany, so I've rolled a 2, which means I've got 3 hills on the table. 3 hills. I'm going to roll 3 dice and we're going to see where that places it. Well, interestingly, 2 of them are in area 6 and 1 of them is in area 3, which is over there. So what you can do at this point in time, if would normally be the case that I'd be playing against a real live opponent, and we would choose in those areas where you can place your hills. At this point in time, I'm actually just going to roll a dice, because obviously each 2 foot by 2 foot area has got 2 sub areas within it. So one's in area 1 and one's in area 3. So we've actually got 2 hills here. So I'm going to use a double hill there, and that's going to be that one there, and I'm just going to roll a dice over there, and that means we've got a hill in that area there. So we can see that that's how simple it is for that. Now we're going to roll the dice to see how many areas of woodland we've got on the table. Now this is Germany. Germany is the woodiest part of any area in the book. So we've rolled a 2, which means we're going to have 6 areas of woodland. So the easy thing to do then is roll 6 dice. So we've got 2 in area 6, we've got 2 in area 4, and we've got 2 in area 3. So it's interesting, we've got our terrain going around the edges. So what I'll do is, rather than you stand there while I put all the trees out, is by the power of Lard magic, I'll click my fingers and the trees will appear. And we're back in the room, and as we can see, we've got our trees on the table. These are woods. If I'd rolled 3 dice the same, so if any area had 3 woods in them, it would immediately become a forest, and that would cover all 4 areas in that area. And the same thing happens with the next terrain type, which is marsh. If you get 3 of those in one area, it becomes a swamp, and the whole area is a big unpassable swamp. So let's roll the dice to see how many we've got. We've got 4. We've got 4 areas of marsh, so it's unlikely we'll get 3 in the same area, but we nearly did. We've got 2 over there, and we've got 1 over here and 1 over there. Now that's absolutely packed with terrain, so I'm just going to roll that one again, and that puts us over there. Because you can't have a marsh on a hill, and you can't have a marsh in a wood, so you have to re-roll that one. So we're going to roll, well, the 2 areas that are covered in marsh there are pretty obvious, because there's only 2 areas left in that square. So I'm just going to take some of my marshy terrain and put that down, and that also means that nobody's going to be wandering about on either of my force morale trackers, which are neatly penned in there. So I'm going to, again, 1, 2, 3, 4, see which area it's in here. So obviously it's a 6, so 4. That sees us place our marshy terrain over here. So we can see that these are roughly about 12 inches square, but it's rough. It doesn't particularly wildly matter. and we'll roll for the other one over there, and there we go. So, and finally we're going to roll the dice to see if we've got any habitation on the table, and we do. So we've got one piece of habitation. Where are we going to put that? And funnily enough, they very wisely built their house not in a marsh but over there, and area 4 is going to be over there. So that is roughly our the start of our terrain. What the players would now normally do is both players would place one small, roughly 6 foot, sorry, that needs to be slightly bigger because the built up area is about 9 inches square. So there we go. So what we would do now is both players would place one small, roughly 6 inch by 6 inch piece of terrain on the table. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a bit of a field over here. So he's got a garden, he's now got a field, and I think we'll put some rocks on the table. Now, I'm not batting for either team here, I'm batting for both. If I'm Roman, I really don't want a lot of broken terrain. If I'm German, I probably do want to break the Romans up. So let's roll to see who, 1, 2 or 3, I'm going to place it for the Romans. I'm placing it for the barbarians. So I'm actually going to put it right here because that's in a horrible place for the Romans. But equally, at this point in the game, we don't know where they're going to be coming on the table, and we don't know what the scenario is going to be. And that comes next. Okay, what we're going to do, we're going to have a look at the list of scenarios, and we're going to roll the dice to see which scenario we're going to be doing. So, foraging party. So the first thing we need to do is to find out where our deployments areas are on the table, because we've then got to, that will then determine where the objective is going to be placed. So for a foraging party, it's variable both sides deploy from opposite table edges. So we roll the dice to see whether we're coming on at the ends of the tables or at the sides of the tables. So we're coming on at these sides. 2 players would roll to see who gets to choose which side they go from. I'll roll red for the Romans and white for the Germans. And I think the Romans are probably going to be keen to come on here with the deployment area here, the 2 foot deployment zone here, because that will allow them to scout quite a lot of the terrain on the table, anything within 12 inches. So this terrain area would be scouted, this terrain area would be scouted, so would this one. So that would leave the Germans with more limited options for their ambush points, because we're going to be talking about them in a minute, but we're moving into their territory. So we're going to put the entry point here. Now that tells me, with the entry point being in area 5, we're going to have to place an objective in either areas 1 and 3. And we've already got an objective there. So in terms of foraging, so we're going to roll the dice and see, and actually we're going to place another area of habitation in that area. So let's find that, and we can then set that up, and we're ready with our deployment area. Now we need to find out where the opposing player deploys from, and we'll roll the dice for them, and they are deploying, funnily enough, in the area where those objectives are. So it's going to be a fairly hard fought battle, I think, for the Romans as it is. So let's get that set up, and then we'll come back and look at selecting our force. So there we are, that's our scenario. We put on our additional piece of terrain over there. The Roman objective, we've got 3 pieces of terrain, the original habitation, and 3 pieces of habitation, the original building with its garden, and then 2 other little fields of crops. The Roman objective in this game is going to be to get their cart, because they automatically get a luxury Roman cart, from here, and to go and forage 2 of those areas of habitation. And when they're there, they have to roll a task roll of 7. So each time they have a group doing it, they'll roll a d6. When they get to 7, that area has been scoured for forage and the wagons suitably loaded up. Then they'll move on to the next one. Well, the Romans are very lucky that they've got all their terrain, the habitation areas of terrain are in one place. But at the same time, The Germans are coming on with their deployment point on the table over there, so it's going to be a tough fight. And whilst the Romans have scouted these areas here, they haven't scouted this area here, they haven't scouted those areas there, they haven't scouted this marsh, they haven't scouted any of the habitation. So the Germans are going to have lots of other opportunities to deploy on the table from different places. But let's have a look at our forces, and we'll have a look at our core forces and then the support options that we have chosen for them. So here we have our German force. They've got a status 3 leader leading them, and he's got a status 2 leader alongside him, and they are commanding one group of oath-sworn warriors who are the elite warriors, and two groups of ordinary warriors. You can see they're formed up there in a swine's head mob, and over there we've got our third leader, status 2 leader, with two groups of 10 warriors, and in front of them a group of 6 tribal slingers. We rolled for support for this game, as these guys are going to be operating in their own territory. We have to take into account 6 points off their support options, and as we've decided we're going for a force of 135 points, that actually allows them slightly less than that. So we're going to take for them a group of 6 fanatical warriors, and we're going to take a group of woodland archers, and alongside that we've got the wailing women as a support option, who operate as something of a rallying point for the Germans. There's accounts of German ladies with scant regard for decency in terms of attire, rallying their men by suggesting that they didn't want to miss out on them going into slavery. So the wailing women can act very much as a great rallying point, so the Germans can pull out of an attack and then rally up at that point and then look to going back in. So what I'm trying to do with this force is maximise the impact by taking 2 groups of missile troops, because I really want them to chip away at the Romans, and I've got the fanatics who can potentially break the line, and then we've got the wailing women who can serve as a good rallying point for our force. So hopefully that we've got a degree of balance there, and as I say, that comes in at 134 points in total. Okay, so here we have our core Roman force. We've got a centurion, and alongside him an optio, and they have got 3 groups of legionaries. This is an early imperial force. They've got 3 groups of legionaries. They've got 1 group of auxiliary archers. They've got 1 group of auxiliaries, who are great because they can operate in formations, or they can operate in a skirmish order. Now, in terms of their support points, I decided that we would spend 19 points on bumping up to a second group of auxiliaries, and another 6 points to give them an optio. So we are pretty close there to exactly the same points, and as we can see, our Roman force is significantly smaller there. We had just 40 figures in our core force, and now we're up to 48. Are we 49 with that force? So significantly smaller than the barbarian Germans, but I'm sure they're going to give them a run for their money. So that's the 2 forces that we're going to be fielding today. So there we have our forces. Now, before we can start, we need to put together the game deck. Now, what do we have in the game deck? Well, we've seen that our barbarians have got 3 leaders, so we certainly need to have leaders 1, 2 and 3 in the deck. But they've actually got 2 other supernumerarium leaders. That is the leader who's with the slingers and the leader who's with the woodland archers. So they need 5 leader cards in the deck. For red, they have got 3 named leaders, and they've also got one Supernumerarium leader who we put in leader 4 for there, and that is their leaders in the card. On top of that, we put in, or we don't put in, more to the point, on top of that we take out 6 blue Signa cards and 6 red Signa cards, which are handed to the players. Now the players can keep these in their hand for as long as they like and play them any time in the game. It may be that you want to chuck your cards in early on, get your troops advancing as quickly as possible, get your missile troops darkening the sky, unleashing a deadly volley of missiles. Or it may be that you decide you want to hold them in your hand until, you feel it is the key moment of the battle when you need to apply these and use your reservoir of command and control most effectively. So you can do that for as long as you like. Once you play these cards, they go in the discard pile and recycle through the game deck as we go, as a normal leader card will do. And that means they're going to come out sometimes and they're not going to come out sometimes, because the card that we also add is the Tempest Fugit card. Tempest Fugit card, time flies, it's the end of the turn as we know it, and that is the point when you get an opportunity to maybe use some of those Signa cards to activate any units that haven't activated on the table. So it doesn't necessarily represent the complete end of the turn, but it's signifying that the turn is about to end. So get done what you need to get done. That's the game deck, so we can put that to one side, knowing that's all ready to go. What we also have is the Infamy deck. Now, the Infamy deck is made up of, it's 18 cards, every single one of them unique. And in a campaign game, the number of Infamy cards you have may vary. The more famous you are, the more you've achieved, the more you your reputation has grown, the more you will find that the enemy, some members of your enemy's side may betray them to you, or some people on in Rome may come to your assistance in some way, shape or form. So we've got all sorts of people in here. We've got a betrayer, we've got a blackguard, we've got a calumniator, we've got a conspirator, we've got a deserter, we've got an intriguer, we've got a machinator. What else we've got? We've got spies galore, we've got traducers, we've got traitors, we've got turncoats, we've got assassins and deceivers. And in fact, those two off the top are the two that we're going to be dealing out. So we give this a shuffle before the game. So a deceiver. This is the card that our barbarian player is going to take for this game. A shadowy figure advises you to prepare for a fight. As a result, one group, mob or formation, may throw an additional round of javelin or pilum. So that's quite a nice one to have. You get yourself, you're prepared for battle, so you brought extra ammunition with you. And an assassin is the one the Romans have. A shadowy figure in your pay seeks to harm your foe. So when an enemy leader is potentially hit in close combat, this card will adjust the roll by -2. So if your opponent's leader is fighting in the front rank and they lose a casualty, this may be a time to literally stick the dagger in. So as I say, in this game, where we're just playing a one-off game, you get 1 each. If you're in a civil war game, you would get 2 each, because you're more likely to get people like this coming out of the woodwork at that point in time. So we'll allocate those cards to the 2 players, and then the deck, the Infamy deck, will just sit there to one side, because there may be opportunities during the game when people come to give you further assistance, and that could be related to a random event, or it could be related to an end of an act, which is an end of a period of play. So there we go, we've got our cards ready. And we've got our Infamy cards dealt out. So time to move on to really start moving towards starting the game. What's the next step? We know that we've got our Romans who are going to be deploying from here. We know that we've got our Germans who are going to be deploying from over there. So the next stage is to look at the pre-game scouting phase. Now, this really depends on what light cavalry, for the Romans, on what cavalry they've got with their force, and what allied tribal troops. For each cavalry group in their force and for each group of allied tribal troops, they are able to place an ambush point somewhere on the terrain that they've already scouted. Now, to keep things simple for this game, I decided to leave cavalry out. So they haven't got any of that, and they also don't have any allied tribal units, because I felt it really important to get the auxiliary up to strength and with a leader. So they actually don't get any. Because the Romans are moving into barbarian territory, into German territory, the barbarians can place an ambush point on any of the unscouted bits of terrain. So we know that the Romans have scouted this, this and this, because they're within 12 inches of their deployment area. So the barbarians can start off with placing an ambush point, or more than one ambush point, on all the other terrain pieces. And the great thing for the Germans is that the Romans are not going to be able to shut any of them down. So as a game, to show an example of how the rules work, this is a complete cock-up, because I have removed that section, but I'll show you how it works anyway, and we'll go through it. So we've got some of our luxury ambush points, just really sort of attractive little points, and the Germans are quite like the idea of having something over here, because if the Romans are foolish enough just to wander past here, that's very much within the 12-inch ambush range, which has potential to be extended further. So they're also going to put one over here. They're definitely going to be putting one on the objective. In fact, they're definitely going to be putting two on the objective. We'll put another one a bit deep. They're going to put another one over here on the marsh. You can only ambush out of low standing terrain, so the fields, the marsh, with one unit, but you can deploy from it. So they're going to be able to deploy troops from that, just not into contact with the enemy. To come out of the woods, you can ambush out of the higher standing terrain. So we've got to think about where the Germans are going to be placing this. And I definitely think a good place for it might be there. So we can see that the Romans moving onto this table are potentially going to be feeling that the trees are moving to the side, just outside their peripheral vision. They're catching fleeting movement, and that really sets the scene for the Romans going into barbarian territory. Now, had I got some light cavalry with my force, I could, I say I as I'm a Roman, but I'm also a German, I could be scouting some of my enemy's ambush points. And were I a German and had I got cavalry, I could be screening some of those. So the way we would do that is we would place a dice next to each one of these with a 1 to 6, because there's 6 of them on there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And as the barbarian player, let's say I had 2 units of cavalry, I'd take 2 more dice, and without my Roman opponent seeing them, I'd simply put them like that. And then when my opponent declared where they were scouting, I would show that I'd chosen to screen ambush points 2 and 4. At that point in time, we'd make a dice roll. The fact that I'm screening it allows me a greater opportunity to stop them spotting it. The Romans at this point in time will be dicing to see whether they remove the ambush point completely or whether they simply convert it to a deployment point. That's a point from which the Germans can deploy but not ambush. So we can see there's a bit of a thinking game, a bit of a game of bluff and double bluff going on in the pre-game scouting phase. But for this useless example, the barbarian Germans have got access to all of those ambush points, which makes it all the more scary for the Romans. So in that choice of force, the Romans went for fighting power rather than having eyes and ears out there by bringing in tribal allies. So that's a decision they might live to regret or might not live to regret. We will see. But that now gets us to the point where we can actually start our game and play that through. So I think for this video, that's it for this this film. If you've got any questions, please don't hesitate to ask them and leave them below, and we can hopefully give you all the information you want on that. So as I say, we've gone through how we set up the table, how we determine the scenario, how we determine where the deployment points are going to be, but also how we then go through the initial scouting phase and how we put together our deck. So that is a pretty comprehensive walkthrough to bring us to where we are now. Don't forget to come back and see the next part, which is where we actually crack on with the game itself. Should be good fun.